Hello and welcome to the People, Place and Nature podcast. Today we have something a little bit different from normal, as we will actually be looking at a project that I've been involved with. This project is potentially the UK's most sustainable retrofit home. It's a demonstration project to trial new technologies, both in terms of energy and carbon saving, but also water reduction and efficiency too. And it's probably the most water efficient home in the country as well. To explore the project, we're joined by Ben Harrison, the project lead and Housing Sustainability Officer for Southend-On-Sea Council. Before we start the episode, I need to say a few thank yous. Firstly, to all those involved with the project, such as Southend-On-Sea Council, South Essex Homes, Houghton & Sons, who worked on the void works, Morgan Sindall Property Services, who helped with the retrofit alongside the council, and for filming this episode of the podcast with us. Then on the water side, everyone involved with the Catchment to Coast project, which we'll talk about a bit more within the episode itself, water offsets, hydro rocks, the council parks team, and Eurovia. So if you're interested in sustainability, net zero, architecture, or water resilience, this is certainly one for you. And of course, also a big thank you to everyone involved with the build and all the other various bits that went on with the project itself that I haven't had a chance to mention here. So thank you, everybody, and I hope you enjoy this episode. Good morning, and thank you for joining us today to talk about this really interesting and now award-winning project that was going on here in Southend-on-Sea. So do you want to tell us a bit about sort of your background and why this project has sort of taken place and what it is that's going on here?
Okay. So in terms of my background, I'm the Sustainable Housing Officer for Southend, and I lead on our retrofit programme and our housing sustainability programme more broadly. So we declared a climate emergency in 2019 and then committed to reaching net zero by 2030 as a council. So I guess a lot of this is all partly building up to that. So we're trying to make our new build homes more sustainable, and then the council owns just over 6,000 homes that we need to retrofit a lot of those to be able to hit that net zero target. So our houses make up about 40% of the council's carbon footprint. So housing is going to be key for us to hit any of those sort of longer term ambitions and goals. This house is kind of the start of that. So we were fortunate to have won money through the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, and we'll be looking to retrofit more homes in the future, but we really wanted to start with one sort of our classic homes that we have in the city and see, okay, what is possible to do to it, what are the latest technologies, do they work in practice as well as they work on paper, are the residents going to get along with the technologies, know how they work, are they actually going to work in practice? So it was all about that really, just sort of throwing all these different technologies at the home, seeing what worked before then rolling it out further to hit some of those wider targets.
Okay, that's great. It's good to see that there's actually sort of something like this going on, because one of the things you always hear in the news is about how we really need to retrofit homes and how we're going to fund that and all this kind of thing. But you don't necessarily always see many projects coming forward. So it's quite exciting to see one that's, well, I'm fortunate because I've seen it a lot of the way through, but being able to see what's actually going on here and see the tech actually working in the house as well, and then also get the feedback from the residents as they move in too. So this house is also quite unique because it's also one that the council has sort of reclaimed, haven't they?
Yes. Yeah, so the journey of the house was sort of brought to us by our empty homes officer who sort of noticed the house. That was then purchased by our acquisitions programme. So we have a programme that buys back. A lot of them are ex-council houses, so this would have once been a council house, as a lot of the others are sort of on this street. That was obviously bought at some point, and then we bought it back through the acquisitions programme, which is part of our drive to sort of boost affordable housing in the city. So yeah, it was sort of part of that journey to start with, and then we picked it up through the retrofit process because we would have been having to do works on it anyway to bring it back up to standard to then let out. So it was kind of us intervening and joining those programmes together.
Okay, fantastic. And then also, as I mentioned sort of a moment ago, you've also been receiving an award already for the project.
Yes.
Because it's part of a collection of projects going on, as you've mentioned.
Right.
So why did you guys get the award? Because it's also incredibly innovative what you're doing here, isn't it?
Yeah. So as you say, it's part of that wider programme. So I think that's something that I'm really proud of, and the fact that we've sequenced it in that way. We've sort of had this as our exemplar show home. We've done a lot of work to get our retrofit action plan ready before we went into this, so that we could properly sequence, and model. Okay, we've got these long-term targets. What's it going to look like to try and hit those? How much is it going to cost? What's the sort of quickest, most effective, most efficient, cost-effective way of getting to them.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of got that story running through it. We set those targets, we did that modelling work, and now this is it coming to fruition on site. So I think that was something that I'm really proud of, is that we've taken it through that journey, and then that will then continue onto the other homes that I mentioned earlier. But I think in terms of the award, probably the amount of stuff that we've done on the home,
Mm-hmm.
retrofit at the minute is growing massively in the sector. There's lots of other councils that have won the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund and registered providers as well. But we've taken with this home a lot more steps. We've done the water saving measures, so we've got the hydro loop, which is going to be recycling water from sort of the shower and the washing machine to then reuse that in the property. That's something that a lot of people aren't doing. That is a bit newer. So whilst some of the things we've done, solar panels, wall insulation, that stuff is becoming a little bit more commonplace. I think to have done that and the water saving measures all on one home is quite unique.
Yeah, I think absolutely. And part of the reason that that's taking place as well is because the programme's also joined another programme, which is the Catchment to Coast project, which is part of the government's FCRIP programme, which I've had to write down because it's the Flood and Coastal Resilience Innovation Programme. So that's something that I've been working on and how I kind of got involved with the project as well. And this is to really look at sort of water resilience as a whole. So I'll talk a little bit on this one because I know this side a bit more. So that, as I say, is to look at water as a whole. So how do we look at water resilience in terms of there's too much water or too little water? So part of it's about trying to trial new technologies as part of this programme as well, join the two together on the innovation side and look at how we can reduce, reuse and save water within properties. And then also how can we look at mitigating flooding impacts as well. And that Catchment to Coast project, sorry, I've got a rookie error here. That Catchment to Coast project is quite an interesting one because it's looking at it across the landscape. So it's looking at things in the upper catchment about how farmland and some of those areas can be reduce the runoff of water, how to manage it better, how to reduce erosion. Then also looking at the coastal elements of how that can be enhanced and improved in terms of coastal defence, how we can stop erosion and bits falling into the sea and manage that aspect and improve water quality. But then also it's looking at sort of areas within the city in the middle catchment, which looks at sort of how streets can be improved and enhanced, and also how those measures can go into individual houses, how people's behaviours can kind of be effective to sort of manage those assets better. So the other really interesting thing about this property is this is the first project on that programme also to come forward, which helps bring a lot of that thinking forward too, which is something we'll have a look at outside and around the house in a moment as well. So on that, it's also, I think, important to talk a bit about sort of the bigger picture of like why we're doing this. So the Catchment to Coast bit sort of alludes to it, and you've talked about the wider sort of decarbonisation angle, but there's obviously a lot of other sort of issues that people generally are facing, not just in the UK but all over the world. It's a great sort of showcase to test and explore how we can tackle these challenges.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that I love about retrofit in general, is like you say, it's not necessarily just about the carbon savings, which is one of the main reasons that we started on this project, but obviously the cost of living crisis has now really come to the fore. So now we're looking at, well, how do we get these homes, these 6,000 homes, affordable for our residents and make sure that they can still live comfortably in a warm, safe, healthy home. You've obviously got the damp mold condensation aspect of it as well. A lot of these homes were built in the 1950s and aren't necessarily suited to modern living. So it's about bringing all of those different sort of aims that the council is looking to sort of progress on into one project, which is why I really like what we've done here. So it's the carbon savings, but it's also the bill savings, the fact that the air quality of the home is going to be improved, and people hopefully are going to be able to afford to live here comfortably, and then obviously go and spend that money in the local economy or wherever else they can then choose to spend that, because they don't have to worry as much about their bills as they did before.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's worth just covering some of the tech that's sort of going into the house. So some of it we'll go and have a look at in a bit more detail, but I think it was also interesting to understand how these things are going to benefit people, and also the cost case, because I guess the challenge is you can't necessarily do this on every home. So it's using this program to help identify what the sort of best bang for your buck sort of products and techniques are to save energy and things. So some of the text that's gone in, you've got things like triple glazing, there's the heat recovery ventilation system that's gone in as well. You've obviously got solar panels, draft-proof doors, you've got external wall insulation, and I think you did internal as well, or was it mainly external?
Not done internal, no, yeah, we're mainly doing external, and that's what we'll be doing on the other homes as well.
Okay. And then obviously there's heat pumps going in as the main sort of heat supply.
Yeah, it's obviously taking the home off gas, and that's key on that sort of carbon side of it. But like I say, that's why we tried to throw a lot of these measures into this project to see, you know, what like you say, where do you get the best bang for your buck, which measures are the best to do going forward, so that we know exactly where we can focus, you know, what are basically quite scarce council resources at the minute, where do they need to be focused the most for the outcomes that we're trying to achieve.
So on some of those then, so why, for instance, on the insulation front, why have you gone for external installation opposed to internal installation?
Yeah, so obviously we had to do, it's a solid wall, so there was no option to do the cavity, so it had to be either internal or external insulation. And I guess that's where it gets into the wider picture. It's not just all about which is cheaper, which is going to save you more carbon or whatever. It's actually, you know, which is going to work best for the residents. And that was really key for us on a lot of these homes. We don't want to be having to move the resident out, potentially alter in their kitchen and their bathroom to be able to insulate the inside of the properties. That solution has its place more on voids where the property's empty and you can sort of do that work a little bit easier. But that's kind of the main reason we went for it. It was to reduce disruption. And obviously then you don't lose floor space as well, which you would with the internal insulation.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. And as you say, there's no one catch-all solution. It's you know, a myriad of solutions that can be applied differently. And some things, you know, like the heat recovery ventilation, that plays a big part in reducing damp and things as well, doesn't it? So not only are you saving the energy and catching that and bringing fresh air in, but you're also helping reduce sort of damp-related problems. So it's also thinking like, what are the other benefits that come from this? So another example would be some of the water-saving tech. So you've already mentioned the Hydroloop, but there's also a valve that's going to be going into the property which reduces the flow of water. So this is more on my side, so I'll talk about this one. So what this does is quite interesting. There's two parts to it. One part reduces sort of pressure, and what that means is when you have sort of gravity-fed system or too much pressure and you switch the tap on, it sort of goes and you get this sort of sudden glut of water. It quickly corrects, but over time it equates to a significant amount of water. So this system can basically stop that happening. And then the second part is it restricts flow. So what this means is basically it maintains the pressure of the system, but actually the volume of water passing through it is less. And people might think, oh, that's going to ruin my shower. But actually there's been no noticeable difference for anyone that's been trialled using this system so far. And interestingly, on average, it saves about 22% of household water. So quite a significant reduction in water and water bill saving. So when I looked at my house for this, which is just a normal semi-detached 2-bedroom house, it's estimated to save about £80 a year in water. But actually on the energy front, which is quite surprising, because as the water's moving more slowly through your home, it means the water's moving more slowly through your shower and all of these things. So you're heating less water too, and on average that's been proven to be between £250 and £450 a year in energy saving, depending on our wildly variable energy tariffs at the moment. So it's interesting how a lot of these techs have multifunctional uses that you might not necessarily think of initially.
It's about those wider added values, which is what we've had a lot with this home, like you touched on the ventilation. You know, some of those might not necessarily be saving you energy, but it's about that air quality, it's about reducing damp mold condensation and those wider factors, which then will have a payback over time through reduced maintenance and call-outs and things like that. And I think that's one of my favourite parts of the home is the heat recovery ventilation, just because it really brings it all together. You know, there's no point doing all this insulation and making the home really airtight and then not ventilating it properly, and then you get moisture issues. So that was kind of the key element that brought it all together and made sure we could insulate but also keep the home healthy and working as it should.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So as part of that sort of general sort of sealing the house and making it more airtight, is that why you sort of introduce things like triple glazing? Because triple glazing is not something you really see very often in the UK, at least in my experience.
Yeah, so on new build properties that's going to be mandatory, I think, from 2025 onwards. The standards with new builds are increasing all the time, so it's going to become a lot more common there. In retrofit, you wouldn't normally do it, but in this case, because the windows were already, there was massive gaps in the windows, the seals had gone, they needed replacing anyway, basically. We decided to take that uplift and say, okay, we would have had to have done double glazing anyway, let's do triple and get that extra, but you would never normally replace working double glazing with triple because the payback just isn't there. So that was kind of how that decision came about. And then obviously trickle vents, in terms of the ventilation part, that's really important. So none of the windows had trickle vents before, and that's the little vent in the top of the window that you can open to let airflow in that way as well. And again, that's now building regs, so regulation standard in all replacement windows. You have to have
those even if you've got a ventilation system. Because I thought you could have, this is one novelty, because it's not something I deal with, but I thought you could have sort of either or.
I think if you have a ventilation system that's whole house, so a proper mechanical ventilation system that's doing all the rooms, then you can not do trickle vents. But yeah, so you just need to check that. In some scenarios, you can get away without trickle vents, because obviously it then compromise the mechanical extract. But in this case, yeah, we needed to have both.
Okay. I would like to talk to you about the heat pump, but I think we'll go down and see that and talk about it there, because it's quite a lot bigger than I thought I had in my mind, I suppose. And then I guess the only other thing on sort of the tech on the water side, you've already mentioned the Hydroloop, and we can have a quick look at that as well. But basically, the other thing that's going in is this telemetric water meter. So what this water meter does and how it's different from other water meters is that, and it's an important part of this project too, is that monitors water that goes into the property. So we'll know exactly how much water is going into the property to be able to see if these actual water saving measures and things are actually having an impact. And normally we test that against sort of historic data, but you can also work it against sort of averages for the size of house and family that comes in. And again, we can then understand whether or not people are seeing a difference in how the house is working. And the reason we haven't put things like some of the new types of shower and things in, for instance, is because in a lot of these new projects and innovation programs, they're seen as elements that can be easily tampered with or replaced. So unless you've got direct control over those sort of appliances or assets, it's very difficult to sort of get it through with some of the new legislation. So obviously there's a big drive to be super efficient, and that's an ambition, but some of the new projects and new legislation that's coming around water neutrality, nutrient neutrality, those things, there's also that angle. So it's interesting to have this case study without that, to sort of have a provide a basis, and then in some future homes that might be an opportunity to look at to then see the difference in how it performs. Because as you mentioned, this is the first of several projects coming forward. And the next one I think is it 11 homes, the next?
The new build homes, yeah, that's right, yeah. So we're bringing forward a few brownfield sites at the minute for new build as well.
Okay, interesting. Okay, and then I guess we can go and see the Hydroloop, and we'll probably talk about that while we're there as well. And then finally, rainwater harvesting. So on the side of the house, there's sort of a slimline rainwater harvesting tank, isn't there? And that's just to provide water for sort of the outside of the property for watering the garden and things. But also the Hydroloop's excess water can be overflowed into that, and to sort of help top that up and add additional capacity so you're not losing more water. So there's quite a lot of really interesting stuff going on. I think the only other sort of question I've got around some of these bits is, again, kind of on the bigger picture. So do you guys have any idea at the moment of like the level of carbon saving that you might achieve through all these measures?
For this house we do, so we've modelled, as I say, the baseline data before we did anything, and then we've done the figures again through various modelling systems for afterwards. It's currently looked, so the house is emitting, I think, about 3.5 tonnes of CO2 per year before we did any measures. So that's, I mean, equivalent to sort of, just to put that in context, an average mature tree absorbs, I think, about 10 kilograms of CO2 per year. So we're talking hundreds of trees per house. But yeah, it's now down to a negligible amount. We're talking 0.2, I think it's modelled to get to, tonnes.
Wow.
So yeah, it's very, very low. And obviously as the electricity grid continues to decarbonise, because this home is now fully electric and there's no gas, as the electricity grid decarbonises, so does this home. So we have to kind of wait for stuff to happen over here. We can't do everything. But once that happens, it will be net zero carbon home for heating and hot water. So really good on that front. And then on the bill savings, we've modelled, it was about £2,000 a year to run before the works, and it's looking at being about £500 a year after the work. So a lot of hopefully extra cash for the resident to spend on other things rather than energy bills.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's the cost of all the measures?
So there's a few different ways of looking at it. Obviously, as I said, for the windows, it was more of an uplift. So we've sort of taken some of that cost out because we would have been having to replace the windows anyway. For the heat pump, if you're a private tenant, you can get the boiler upgrade scheme grant, which takes £7,500 off the amount. So it depends. For this home, we were looking, I think, at about 70,000 that we spent on the measures. That's before you take off the fact that we were going to have to replace the windows anyway. So that immediately brings it down by about 5,000. But yeah, there's sort of quite a few caveats in there for the cost.
Yeah, that's it.
Because it's going to depend on the individual scenario. So yeah, factor those things in, you're looking more like 50,000.
Okay. Yeah, and I think as well, it's also important to bear in mind that it's like a long-term investment for the council and all of these things as well, isn't it? And also, again, it's like an innovation home, so you wouldn't necessarily need all of this stuff doing on every home. It's just a case study to trial everything and see, how things perform and monitor everything. So, no, I think that's pretty impressive, really, pretty impressive saving. Again, it's all about long-term thinking as well, isn't it? You're not in this for the short haul. It's about building that long-term resilience.
That's it, yeah, because there is payback there, so as I say, £1,500 a year saving on the bills, but you've also got the fact that at the minute the government's saying that sort of from 2030 onwards, homes will all have to be EPCC if you want to rent them out. Obviously this was a D before, so you've got the commercial element of that. Obviously savings on repairs and maintenance because of the quality of the stuff that we put in, so you've got all of those extra kind of hidden values almost on top of the straightforward bill payback as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as well, it's also on the water side, something really worth bearing in mind because there's some predictions that water bills are going to go up by 60%. And you see all the issues with Thames Water and all the sewage release and things into the oceans and the rivers, that this is a really quite big crisis. And actually, there's a lot of new legislation coming in that I mentioned a moment ago, whereby now you actually can't build new homes in some regions of the UK unless you're able to demonstrate that water neutrality. So you've already mentioned the government schemes helping reduce the cost and the outlay in terms of some of these new techs, but actually similarly in a lot of these areas that are now experiencing these serious issues, there's a lot of funding now available to also fund those sort of retrofit measures, like Thames Water, for instance, are funding about 50% of the hydraulic units now. So the water companies are also starting to realise that actually, yes, we can keep building new sewage treatment plants, we can keep building new, mining more aquifers and more abstraction from rivers, but actually it's not really sustainable. What we actually need to do is take a much more circular route and reduce use of source, all of this kind of thing.
About the bigger picture.
Exactly. So great. So I think that's we've covered quite a lot there. So I think what we'll do is we'll go and have a wander around and a look at some of the bits of kit and everything that's going on around the place. Cool. So here we have a heat pump. So this is an air source heat pump.
Yes.
That's my limited understanding of heat pumps. So can you tell us a bit about it and also why you went for this as sort of the heating option for the house?
The air source heat pump is fully electric, so no fossil fuels involved. Well, the national grid obviously burns fossil fuels to make the electric, but that is being phased down by the government. So eventually, this will be sort of low carbon, fossil fuel free heating. So obviously took the gas boiler out, we put this in, and it works really well on homes like this where you've done all the insulation. A gas boiler is only sort of 90% efficient. Sort of 1 unit of sort of energy in gets you 1 unit of heat out, whereas this will be more like 400% efficient generally across the year. So 1 unit of energy in will get you 4 units of heat out. That's kind of how they work. So yeah, it takes air in from the outside. There's heat in the air, even though we might think it's cold. There's refrigerants within this that boil at much lower temperatures than water. So for them, it is still really hot. That then produces a gas that gets compressed, and that produces the heat that then heats the system for the heating and hot water. So yeah, really efficient way of heating homes, and obviously fossil fuel free, which is the main goal really here.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the other thing is to note with some of these, because this is the first time I've seen one in person, and it's quite big.
Yeah.
So, but I think the thing is as well that some houses, especially on the new builds, they're being sort of mounted up on the roof or whatever else as well, aren't they? So you're getting a bit of flexibility with sort of like where they go as well. So we're here in the back garden, we should say as well. So yeah, that's very interesting. So did you look at any other sort of heating system alternatives, or not really? You just thought this would probably be the best one to try?
Not for this home, yeah, we really wanted to try heat pumps. Obviously that's what the government's sort of pushing at the minute with the boiler upgrade scheme. It's all about air source heat pumps, so we were kind of just aligning with that really. We are thinking about other stuff. Obviously these aren't going to work on all homes. Not all homes are going to have a nice garden with this amount of space. So yeah, there's alternatives that we're looking at for other properties, for new builds and things. You know, not all homes need the amount of energy that this home needs, so you might not always need a big heat pump. But yeah, so we're looking at others, but for this home it was always going to be air source.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So, some of the water side of things around the house. So one thing that we've done in the rear garden here is actually the paving. On the floor here is permeable paving. Now this is pretty common on a lot of new build developments, but it's less common in a lot of sort of retrofits, and especially sort of in homes. So the rear garden's been made like that, and sometimes you get blocks with sort of little nibs that allow the water through, but actually this one has got sort of a permeable gravel sort of in between the blocks themselves to let water drain through. And what we've done in the front is we've got a new bit of technology which is called a hydro rock, which is something really quite cool, but I'll talk a bit more about that there when we go around the front and see a bit more of what's going on. There's also a load of work going on, so you can see bits still being done. And then the rest of the garden really has just been looked at in terms of sort of general resilience. So a lot of the water that's being captured and reused across the house and the garden is being channeled down this way into the ground, and there's some soakaways beneath the grass. And then all the rest of the planting has been based on sort of biodiversity uplift or just resilience in terms of climate resilience and easy maintenance for people who are going to live here, because again it's sort of council-owned housing. And then in the rear we've got a cycle shed with a green roof on it. Here's the heat recovery ventilation system. Can you tell us a bit more about it?
Yes, so the simplest way to describe it, it's like your standard extractor fan you might have in your bathroom or your kitchen, except this one extracts air and it also inputs fresh air as well. But what it does is it captures the heat from the outgoing air first, so it will, every 60 seconds it'll extract air at a very low rate, captures the heat from that air that you've paid to heat inside the property, captures that inside a ceramic unit within this that goes through the wall, holds that heat there, and then 60 seconds later cycles the other way, brings fresh air in, heats that air, and then brings it to the property. So you're getting stale air out, fresh air in, but keeping the heat within the home.
Okay, it doesn't actually take much space just here, this bit. I would have thought that, is there quite a lot of stuff going on behind the wall then?
Yes, obviously, well that is just a core that runs straight through the wall from here to outside, but other than that, that's it, and it is on now, and it's very, very quiet.
Okay, is the main unit for like actually recovering the heat out in the loft, I assume?
It's all in there.
Oh, it's literally this unit,
and it's a ceramic core that runs through.
Oh right, that's interesting, because the ones I've seen before have been like quite big systems.
Yeah, so this is all decentralised. You've got one here, one in the bedroom.
I've not seen that before.
No central system.
Oh.
So very space saving.
That's really interesting. So here we've got the Hydroloop, which is neatly hidden away in this cupboard. So the Hydroloop is quite an interesting bit of technology, and it's here on the water side, so I'll explain a bit about this. So what it's doing is it's taking the grey water, which is everything from sort of your shower, hand basin and bath, all that soapy water that's typically grey, and what it does is it takes it through the system and it cleans it through a series of filters. So it will take out and sort of skim out any sort of bits that float, any bits that sink. The rest of the water goes for a series of filters and then a UV light to kill off anything that's in there as well, finally. And that water at the end is super high quality. It's actually to World Health Organization drinking standards. Now, that sounds great, but in the UK you actually still can't drink it under our legislation. But what it does mean is you can use that water for lots of other things. So what we're doing here is that water is then being pumped back upstairs to flush the toilets, so massively reducing water consumption. And also it can go into things like the washing machine, which is just neatly behind me here. So this unit can take about 300 litres, but there's smaller ones which can take about 160 as well, and sort of go in recessed wall cavities, and even bigger ones that can take even more water. And you can also bank them together to clean much larger volumes of water if you say you have a gym or something like that. So really interesting bit of tech. Now what we're also doing, which you can't quite see here because it's outside, is that actually you can connect the Hydroloop to other systems. So the overflow from it, because it can process a lot of water, if you've got a big family having lots of showers, you may exceed the capacity. What we're doing here is that overflow is going out of the property into a slimline rainwater harvesting tank on the outside to just top that up and add extra capacity. Now that rainwater harvesting tank, as the name suggests, takes rain from the house and the gutters as well, but we're getting much longer periods of drought or sort of uncertain, unclear sort of weather patterns happening, sort of a bit more sporadic. So if there are long periods of drought, you're able to sort of top that up from this to just add a bit more resilience as well. And in this house, what we're doing is we're just using that water for sort of the gardens and exterior uses, maybe washing the car, that kind of thing. But actually, on some properties, if they're bigger properties, you could then pump the water from that rainwater harvesting tank also back into the property for things like using the flushing the toilet, for instance, or the washing machine. Now, the only thing that we don't take is, well, we don't take water from the toilet into this because it's too contaminated, and also you don't take water from the kitchen sink because similarly there's too many fats and greases and oils and dirt and stuff that goes down it that it will block the system up, and you have to maintain it a lot. So that's basically how the system works in principle, and actually on a bigger property or a new build you can connect a lot more stuff into it. So some air source heat pumps have sort of condensers where they condense water. That water can then be fed into the system too. Same with air conditioning. I think some tumble dryers can potentially be connected up as well. So there's lots of other sort of fixtures and things that around the house and a lot of new builds that can be accommodated as well. So it's quite versatile in what it can do. So that's a bit on the water tech here. So here's an example of the external insulation, because outside it just looks like a wall. So it's not so helpful to actually see what's going on. So you've got a very helpful sort of prop here to explain it. So, and also just firstly, I should also add that this home opens tomorrow. So everything's at the moment, there's still a lot of work being done to get everything ready for the opening, and all of this stuff is brought here to bring people from the council and other experts to come around and see examples of what's actually going on. So that's why there's a lot of stuff going on in the background, and you'll see more as we go around.
Yeah. So as you say, we've got this nice helpful cutaway here. So this is the render that you'll see on the outside of the home, but obviously it's helpful to be able to see the whole thing. So that would have been sort of the old solid wall, and then we've insulated on top of that. So you've got the insulation board here, which is 100mm thick. That is just sort of a polystyrene style product, and then you put wool insulation around the windows for your sort of fire break. And then you've got the reinforcement mesh on top of that to make sure that when you put the render and the base coat and all of that on top, you don't get cracks and movement and that kind of thing. It's as simple as that.
Okay, so here we are with sort of the last few bits to show off on the water side of things. So this is actually dealing with more the flood management side of things opposed to sort of the water saving inside the house. So here we are, as you can see, outside. So what we've got here is there's a series of sort of planters, and what these are going to be doing is they're going to be taking the rainwater from the roof of the house. So normally it would just go into your drain, into the main sort of sewer system, flood the city, or into a river and into the sea. So not always so helpful. And we need to really start changing the way we approach designing these solutions. So here we have the first planter. Now, what happens is the rainwater goes in, and normally that would just fill the planter with the plants. But what we've got here is a really interesting bit of tech, which is called HydroRock. So what HydroRock does is it can be used in two ways. One is to attenuate water, which we'll come into in a moment, but also it can be used like irrigation. So basically what that means is that this system here, it will have the plants growing in a normal sort of depth of soil, but then underneath that you can have the HydroRock, which can soak up all that water that's coming from the downpipe. But then what plants can do is they can actually suck water out of that using capillary action. So it can work like an irrigation system which is incredibly resilient, and it doesn't rely on sort of drip irrigation or those other irrigations which are then subject to evaporation from the soil as it gets hot, or won't permeate if the soil's already very hard. It can just go straight into the system. Now the idea is that that will then flow, if it overflows, it will flow into this next planter, so that it uses exactly the same system. Now the paving here is also permeable under my feet, and what that means is, like before, it's going to soak through into the ground, but also we can use HydroRock beneath that to add additional capacity. So normally on a big, significant project, you'd have lots of big tanks in the ground to attenuate the water. But that's a really big sort of engineering problem. You've got to dig a great big hole, you've got to tank it, you've got to put the crates in, you then got to make sure it doesn't collapse when stuff drives over it, all of that kind of thing. Whereas here, you can essentially have your normal permeable paving, then underneath have the HydroRock, which will then mean the water can soak straight through the paving, straight through into the HydroRock, and you can have your attenuation spread out across the site. It's very, very easy to install. You don't have those big sort of geotechnical problems, so that's great. But what we also have here is we add an extra level of resilience to again just showcase it really here and explain how the system can work. And what we've got is there's a series of grills which run along adjacent to the property. So that's there just in case place, the people that move in, don't look after the paving, which a lot of people probably wouldn't. Again, it's just a show project to demonstrate this stuff in one place. So the idea of a lot of this is to demonstrate bigger concepts, the bigger picture on a small scale of how it can work. So these grills will catch any surface water that's running off if it gets blocked up or there's a really serious flood, channel it into another series of hydro rocks, ferry it around the property into this soakaway in the rear garden. So that's how this sort of core bit works here. And the other thing to add on this raised planter is that actually the idea is potentially, if people want to, and once they move in, to grow vegetables and things in here. So again, it's to sort of demonstrate actually additional resilience. So actually you can have some food growing, but that food growing, you won't have to come and water it every day, and you won't have to worry so much about it drying out in the summer because the hydro rocks is there and it's going to allow the plants to suck the water out of it. So it's also sort of demonstrating more sustainable food production. And this system has been found to be really effective for things like date palms and avocados in other countries, where it's reduced water consumption by 60% for avocados, which is crazy. It's a massive water demanding plant. But also it doesn't like a lot of water available all the time or too much water. So actually it's been found to increase productivity as well, because they can suck it out using capillary action. It means that actually they take the water as and when they need it, which also reduces the amount of water you're putting on, reduces stress on the plant, and that has led to about a 25% yield increase in avocado production. So massive water saving, yield increase, and also you can put water soluble fertilizers into that, so the plants are sucking it out as and when they need it to. You're not just covering everything in fertilizer and then contaminating the rivers and the soils as much. So very, very effective, very interesting new technology. So here we've got the attenuation system. So my foot here is on what is your typical highway drain. So these run every so many metres along a typical road, and they're designed to take all of the runoff from that road. And again, normally that just goes into the combined sewer system. So our sewer system in the UK is typically a combined one, which means that it's sewage and rainwater. So it's not particularly helpful, and this is partly why we see really big sort of pollution incidents where sewage works are overflowing into the rivers and contaminating them really heavily. I'm just going to stand on it now out of the road. So that's where the water comes in. So we basically disconnected that, and so it's going to flow directly into this system. Now this is really interesting. So normally, as I said, you have them every few metres, but what we've done here is we've managed to take all the water for a 100-year flood event and attenuate all of it in this swale. Now normally a swale is sort of up to sort of 500 mil deep at most, and then you normally get water sort of sat in it, which can cause a lot of problems for people. They worry about sort of safety, or kids falling in it, or if it fills up with water, there's another risk there, people tripping, all that kind of stuff. That's not really a problem, but people sort of just naturally worry about. So this is actually, as you can see, not very deep at all. It's almost level. There's a slight divot in the middle for sort of rainwater and things. But that's because this system here, where it comes in, feeds directly into the hydro rocks, which sit beneath it and are really quite deep. So what it means is those rocks can soak up that water, and there's a pipe running in which connects into this very big network of them under the ground. Now the hydro rocks are really interesting for another reason. So we've already talked about how they can be used for irrigation and water resilience in terms of drought and things, but here what they can do is they can also filter out particulates. Now that's not such a problem on the other one, because the water's just running straight in from the gully, from the gutter, sorry. But here it's coming in from the gully, so it's going to have like hydrocarbons and heavy metals and things potentially in it. So they're going to help filter those large particulates out. Now you may wonder how it doesn't filter out fertilizer, but it filters out the particulates. So the fertilizer is sort of dissolved in the water, if you will, so it can flow through. Now the last bit to sort of mention here is the planting. So the planting has been chosen to be really climate resilient, and unlike a normal swale where you'd have things that are very sort of tolerant of sort of periodically wet areas or from patches that might have standing water. Just wait for that band to pass. This is all actually quite drought tolerant, and that's because it's not really going to have water sitting in it or going into the topsoil in the same way a normal swale would do. The water's just channeled straight into the hydro rocks beneath to attenuate it all, and because of the depth of the hydro rock, it's not really possible for the plants to suck the water out of it because it's just too deep, unlike the other system we have over there. So it's using a product in two different ways for sort of two different solutions. Also, The other thing to note is that having something like this, where you can actually put more of a diverse range of plants in, compared to what you might be able to see in the background where it's just grass, is obviously there's a much more significant sort of biodiversity uplift as well, depending on the species you can put in. So here they've got to be quite resilient because it's a very small area. It's part of a show home, it's a slightly different scenario. But in other areas you might be able to have a much more wider variety of plants or whatever it is to try and improve biodiversity too. So it's all about thinking, how can we integrate solutions to deliver, as many benefits as sort of possible. So it's not just about water, it's also about biodiversity and all those things too. So as part of the air source heat pump system, you need space and somewhere to stick the hot water and to store it. So that's what we have here, the water storage tank.
Yes, the hot water tank. So yeah, because an air source heat pump sort of operates at much lower flow temperatures than a typical gas boiler, which can heat water instantly, a heat pump can't do that, so you need somewhere to store the hot water, and that's what we got here. So you've got the hot water tank, so the water is heated through the heat pump outside and then will come into here. The hot water tank can obviously be used for your baths, your showers and that kind of thing, but also this is all running through the radiators and the heating system as well. So it's just something to bear in mind. You will need space for this kind of kit as well as the outside heat pump.
Mm-hmm. I have to say it's not as big of a sort of water tank as I initially thought you'd end up with, because you see some, again it's only a sort of 3-bedroom house, isn't it? So it's not enormous.
Yeah.
But it's still not as big of a tank as I kind of expected there to be. So whilst it obviously has quite a decent take of space compared to a normal system, it's not actually that bad. And the other thing we should note that when we were downstairs filming the air source heat pump, it was actually on while we were stood there. And one of the criticisms I've heard a lot about air source heat pumps is that they're very loud, but actually, as you can probably tell having listened or watched, then actually it's incredibly quiet. So this is one of the newer ones which has sort of dealt with that problem now. So this is the thing with it as well, we're trialling all these technologies in this project, but actually also you get this, the technologies are all moving on all the time, getting more efficient and better in all these aspects. So it's quite a useful way for people that maybe have had issues with them before to see that actually, it is changing and things are getting a lot better. So the other thing that's happening with this house is there's a lot of monitoring sort of going on as well. So one thing we did mention outside is actually there's sort of a mini weather station, so we can keep an idea of sort of rain patterns and weather patterns to see how that influences sort of the system and how the system responds to it. But also there's sensors in the house, which I know nothing about. So over to you again.
Yes, so we put these smart sensors in quite a few rooms in the house. Basically what they do is they monitor the heat of the home, the air quality of the home, the humidity, carbon monoxide, all those kind of things. That then feeds back through a really smart, clever hub back to the office, so that we can monitor sort of how the home's doing, the health of the home, and that means that we can sort of then intervene proactively, rather than if a home's getting really humid and then it gets issues with damp or condensation, we can now flag that much earlier on and see if an intervention is needed in that home. So yeah, it's just to see whether what we've actually done is working in practice rather than just putting it in and then leaving.
Okay, so thanks Ben for showing us around the house. Really great to see everything that's going on. Yeah, it's been really interesting. So looking forward to the next ones and see what new stuff we can bring in there. So exactly, it's brilliant. Thank you so much. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you're interested in learning more about sustainable buildings and net zero, then why not check out our episode with Will Campion, who talks about just that, but a little bit more on sort of the new build side and how we can actually build even more super efficient homes when we're looking at it from the beginning. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share to friends and colleagues who might be interested. A huge thank you, of course, to our incredible sponsors, Water Offsets and Vectorworks, our kind supporters, Gillian Goodson Design, and of course, all those mentioned in the intro, and of course, all those not mentioned too, as well as, of course, NDLA and Monsterdon for powering this episode, and a big thank you again for Ben and Morgan Sindall for their time.